Lucy's Kitchen. It's Lucy's Kitchen. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Lucy's Kitchen. Lucy's Kitchen. Lucy's Kitchen. It's Lucy's Kitchen. Lucy's Kitchen. Lucy's Kitchen. Oh yeah. Lucy's Kitchen. She's Lucy and she's got a kitchen. Lucy's Kitchen.
And now that we've got your attention, let's cook. Hi, welcome to Lucy's Kitchen. I'm Lucy, and this is my kitchen. As many of you know, I'm Greek, and I've had a lot of requests for Greek food. So today I'm going to share one of the quintessential Greek dishes, Spanakopita. Spanakopita is simply spinach pie. I'm sure many of you have heard of it or seen it or tasted it, and today you'll learn how to make it. Spanakopita is one of those dishes that is incredibly versatile. It's served as an appetizer. It's served as a side dish. It's sometimes even served as a wonderful main course for vegetarians. It just depends on how large your serving is. I'm going to show you how to make a very, very easy version of Spanakopita, successful, and every time you make it, you're going to get rave reviews. The first ingredient we're going to talk about is phyllo. Phyllo, not phyllo. Some people call it phyllo. Well, phyllo means sheet or leaf or layer, and that's what we do with Spanakopita. We make layers of a paper-thin pastry that is beautiful, fragile, and absolutely crispy and delicious when it's cooked the right way. There's no reason to be intimidated by phyllo. A lot of people are intimidated because they think, oh my gosh, it just dries and crumbles. And it does do that if you don't know what you're doing, and you're going to learn what to do so that it doesn't happen to you. The other ingredients that we want to talk about are, of course, spinach. Now, spinach, you can go out and you can get 5 bags of spinach to make a pound and cook it down yourself, but you don't have to because frozen spinach is absolutely perfect. We just need 1 pound of spinach, of frozen spinach. It's already chopped up and it's already cooked down a little bit for us, so it's going to make our life a lot easier. The next ingredient we have is feta. Now, feta is it's a Greek cheese. Feta actually means slice. It's a particular kind of crumbly white cheese with a pretty pungent flavor if you have never tried it, although most people have because it's also available everywhere. We need about a pound of feta, and it's very easy to crumble yourself, so you might as well buy it in the block and crumble it. It's also fun, but if you don't have time for that, you can also buy it crumbled already. The next ingredient is scallions. Now, I love scallions because they're readily available all year round. They're quite pungent. They have an incredibly fresh flavor, and they probably taste better in this dish than if you were to use regular onions. So scallions it is. We've chopped up 2 bunches of scallions, and 2 bunches gives you about 2 cups, maybe 3 cups of onions. So when you're measuring, in fact, it might even be 4 cups. When you're measuring, again, there's a lot of leeway here, depending on what you have. And if you can't get that many scallions, you can also do half and half with onions. My mother used to do that all the time. We've got eggs. We want 4 eggs we're going to mix in. And I've got some parsley. My mom always liked to put some parsley in her spanakopita. It was one of our secret ingredients. We have 2 more secret ingredients, mint and dill. Those 2 are what make this a really identifiable Greek dish. Also, it's a secret from our family because it's not typical. And then finally, salt and pepper. I would taste your feta, and if it's very salty, cut back on the salt because feta is different depending on who makes it and how it's packaged. Sometimes it's very salty and sometimes it's not salty at all. So you need to judge for yourself. If it's very salty, you might not want to put in any salt. If it's sort of medium or just lightly salty, then you'll probably want to use about a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. The teaspoon of pepper is either way. And the most important thing about making spanakopita is that you have to have all your ingredients ready to go and your filling completely assembled and cooked before you even start to think about opening the package of phyllo. Now we're going to make some filling. Remember, you've got to have the filling done, completely done, way before you ever open up that phyllo. That's a mistake some people make, and then it doesn't turn out. So your phyllo will just, dry out and you won't be happy. So I've got some olive oil heating up, and I'm going to put my herbs in first because I want to have them release some of their oils, and it's especially important when you're using dried herbs. Just stir them around a little. They bubble up, that's good. And then my onions. Woo. We want them to cook a little bit so that they soften. I'm going to add the spinach. Now some people make a big deal about squeezing all the moisture out of the spinach. And if you have a good quality frozen spinach, it doesn't have all that much moisture. And it doesn't matter even if it does, because it cooks down. It really kind of adds to the flavor. So don't worry about the moisture. Save yourself some trouble. Squeezing moisture out of spinach is a pain in the neck. So I just throw it right in. It's already starting to smell incredibly delicious. Very Greek. That smell of mint and dill is immediately coming at me. I'm going to turn it to high. And I'm going to add, let's see, this is about half a cup. I'm going to add about a quarter cup of parsley because it is just one of those nice things. So we're going to just stir this around. And now we are looking for the moisture to kind of disappear. The moment there's a little tiny bit at the bottom of the pan. And so we'll know this is done just as soon as it seems just a little dry. Now, I did taste my feta, and it did taste a bit salty to me, so I took half a teaspoon out of my little dish here. So I'm only using half a teaspoon of salt, but I'm still using a teaspoon of pepper. It wasn't very salty, but it was just salty enough that I didn't want to overdo it. So I've been cooking this on high, and I don't want it to burn, I don't want it to stick, but I want it to be cooked down. And I'm looking at it right now, and there's very little moisture in the bottom of my pan, so I'm going to call this done. All right, we're back. We've cooled our spinach mixture for, I'd say, about 20 to 30 minutes. We don't want it cold, but we do want it to be cooled off enough so that when we add the eggs don't scramble. Right now, it's perfectly cool and ready for me to add the other ingredients. I've got my 4 eggs. I'm going to just beat them lightly. All right, so that's good. I'll pour that in. And now for the feta cheese. We will just dump all that feta in there. And we'll lightly toss all of the ingredients together. So we've got the spinach, feta, all of the seasonings, everything's in here. As I said earlier, we want to be ready to go because when we start, we're going to go. Look at that. You want it to be nicely marbled, and you can do this if your feta is hard. Don't worry if it's in big chunks. It's going to be still fine. And all right, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to set it aside for a minute, and I've got my pan. So when you grow up Greek, you have a variety of wonderful, gigantic pans because you're always feeding like 70 people. So my mother collected a series of these. They're really steam table pans, but they're stainless steel. They're very heavy duty. They're from a restaurant supply store, and she got them from someone who worked in the restaurant business. Imagine that, a Greek in the restaurant business. Well, she was not in the restaurant business herself, by the way. Anyway, I've inherited some of her pans, and I absolutely love this one. This one's really big. It's 10 by 15, and you measure a pan by measuring the bottom of the pan. So it's going to be great. This is going to serve a lot of people. And so now we're almost ready. You have to have your filling ready, and you have to have your butter melted, and I do. And there it is. I've melted 2 sticks of butter. I hope that's enough. And so now we can cut open our phyllo package. Now, I love when phyllo comes in these nice plastic rolls because they are the perfect thing for covering it. In fact, I'm having trouble finding where the edge is. It's here somewhere. There it is. Okay. So it's beautiful because this piece of plastic, or whatever it is about the length of the phyllo, so you can cover it with that. And I'm going to just put this right on my counter. So you can see that there's a little bit that comes out that's, maybe a little bit dried. Sometimes they dry out a little. So this phyllo is already cut in half, as I mentioned. Typical phyllo is it's twice this width. And so if you were using a bigger sheet, you would just fold it in half in the pan and brush butter in between. So I'm going to start by taking a little bit of butter and just brush the bottom of the pan. You don't have to completely soak it, just a little bit. And then start layering your phyllo. Now this phyllo I thought would be exactly the size of my pan, but it's not. So we're going to start overlapping. And so my next sheet, I'm going to put a little butter here. And next sheet, and you can see it's already tearing. Don't be afraid of it. Don't let it run your life. Here we go. Whoops. As I said, nobody's going to see any of this when you get to the top layers. We're going to just make sure that we cover the bottom. And I'm just brushing it pretty lightly with the butter. Well, you might not think it's lightly, but it is. People worry, oh, it's got so much butter. Yes, it has some butter, but when you take that butter and you divide it by how many pieces you get, it's not that much per serving. And one more for this. Nice one with a lot of flour. Now phyllo is machine made and it's available everywhere today. But when I was growing up, you couldn't get phyllo anywhere. Well, once they started having the ethnic markets, you could get it at the Greek market. And in Chicago, there was a whole little Greek town area where there was a little grocery store and some cafes and a candle store, all the things that Greeks need. And so you could go there and get phyllo, but you didn't go there very often. So the women would make their own phyllo. It's hard to imagine, right? Because this is like paper. I'm going to cover it up right now. I'm going to come back to that story in a second. I'm going to spread half of my filling. Just that much. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to share another secret from my family. When I was first learning to make Spanakopita, I really didn't take it on until after I was living by myself in college. And I lived in an apartment. I had a roommate, and I would get excited and show off for some of my friends and make Spanakopita. But I later found out I was making it wrong. My mother found out that I would just put all the filling in and then just put the top on, and that was it. And she would just get so upset with me. Oh, Lucy, no, that's the wrong way to do it. It becomes too fat, too high. And you may have had some in a restaurant where it's like really gooey and high, and the filling is just gross because it's just too thick. Well, I mean, it's not gross because it tastes good, but nonetheless, sometimes you feel like, oh, it's so dry and I'm choking on this stuff. Well, my mother's technique involves doing 2 layers of the filling. Okay, so we're going to go back and do our next layer, and I'll go back to my story. So when I was growing up as a little girl, I would go and watch the grandmothers at the other Greek households make phyllo, and they would use a broomstick, and they would just roll it out on this kitchen table, which of course was what everybody used for everything from, making phyllo to doing homework. And so that there would be a whole gaggle of old women who were all dressed in black and all wore black babushkas because they were all widows, and they would roll out phyllo, and that's what their whole life was about, was making wonderful Greek food. And here I was, this little girl, and I would just be like barely looking over the table and just wanting so much to participate. And my mother would just say, Lucy, you must be a lady, don't go near, you stay and watch, that's all. So, I never got a chance to really get my hands in there. Then later, when I was, I don't know, maybe 11, my mother had to go back to work because she and my father had started a business. And so it was my job to cook for the family. And so I finally got a chance, and that's what led me to us talking here today. So this is my middle layer. And as I mentioned, this is the secret to phyllo to Spanakopita being light, fluffy, and not overwhelming. And so here's one more. And I'm just going to put the butter in the middle. So when you put the filling on, you don't need to butter that layer. So the layer is just the phyllo dough and no butter. If you forget, it's okay. And then I'm putting the rest of my filling on here. Okay. And I'm pushing it on the edges, and I'm just flattening it out so it pretty much is even. So another thing, this looks like it's not that much filling. You're probably looking at it and going, oh my God, how is that going to be anything good? Well, it does puff up. It actually is plenty of filling. And Sometimes you don't even have this much. It's just an incredibly forgiving dish. And you can vary the fillings. Another time I'm going to teach you how to make different kinds of phyllo dishes where it's not just layered like this, but this is the easiest and quickest way to make a dish like this. Now we're ready to take on the next series of layers. Ooh. Now, if your butter starts to get hard, just before you open this up, take it back to the stove and warm it up, because you want to make sure that it's very melted, and that makes it easier to spread. Okay, so as I mentioned before, you just lift it super carefully and then pat it on here. Spread it with a little butter. Now you want a lot of butter to go right around the edges. And when we're done, we're going to take butter and just keep going around until it's nice and saturated. And when you're lifting the phyllo, be very gentle. This phyllo, it sticks slightly, but it's not going to stick so much that you won't be able to lift it. If you're careful, it shouldn't tear. If it does tear, it's okay. So my mother used to throw dinner parties for like 40 people, and actually even more. I can remember birthday parties with 70 people. And she would get all the Greek neighbors to come help her cook. She'd cook for days. She had 2 kitchens. She had a regular kitchen upstairs, which actually she used less than her basement kitchen because she didn't want to get it dirty. She wanted it to always be nice. But when she was having guests, she would definitely use both kitchens. And so she would make chicken, Greek sticky chicken. She would make plenty of Spanakopita, and usually in the triangle form. So that took a lot of effort. She'd make pasticcio, which is Greek lasagna, lamb, kebabs, keftedes. Keftedes, of course, are little Greek, they're kind of like meatballs. They're sort of sausage flavored. They're quite wonderful. And, you know, and then of course the salads, and okay, this one tore in half, but we're using it anyway, right there. And I'm going to grab the other part. I'm going to put it right here. And, you know, it was just an incredible, joyous celebration. It was, growing up Greek was a really unique thing, which of course at the time I thought was normal, but it's not. Anyway, so you just cook and cook and then eat, and then the music starts and people start dancing, and you just dance and dance and dance. A typical birthday party, you know, it was the excuse for getting everybody together. My sister and I had birthdays, and they'd invite, you know, everyone, and like the whole Greek population. And they would start at 3 in the afternoon and go on until probably midnight. And it was just good, clean fun. My family, the Greeks that we knew, they didn't really drink much. They just loved being together and enjoying just the company of each other. One thing about growing up in Chicago is that Chicago had over 1 million Greeks. At the time, Chicago had more Greeks than were living in Athens. And now, even now, Chicago has the most Greeks of any city in the U.S. It's amazing and it's wonderful. So it didn't matter where you lived in Chicago, there were always Greeks everywhere. You didn't have to live in a Greek community like Greektown, because it wasn't really a place to live, it was a place to visit. And kind of relive your life back in Greece. But it was just amazing. And, you know, you treated all the other Greeks like they were your cousins, and you had lots of cousins, but nonetheless, it was just the attitude towards other Greeks. You can imagine what it's like when you come to a country like the United States and you can't speak a word of English and you're just dying to speak your language. And your job is to learn English and communicate and, you know, with your coworkers as much as you can. But it was pretty hard. And so when you'd meet somebody, you know, they were instantly your best friend. So it was just a lovely way to grow up. I'm still friends with some of my Greek friends from when I was 2 years old. You almost don't even think of them as friends. You think of them as family. So we're getting to the last few layers here. Carefully peeling this off now. It's getting a little stickier. And so I think what we want to do on the top layer is make sure that they're a little more square, if we can, because you want them to be the prettiest. I might have trouble doing that. This is kind of not cooperating. So that doesn't matter though, because you're going to learn that it doesn't really make much difference at all when you, oh God. See, I get to show you something that I learned myself. And that is okay. Now it's kind of ugly, but just set it down carefully, pat it down, brush it with butter, and you won't even be able to tell. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to just lay this like that and lay this one, put this one down the middle. Okay, this one's kind of gnarly, like this. Okay, and brush it. Now I'm going to brush it with butter. And I'm going to take my sharp knife, a couple of sharp knives standing by, and just cut that off. Ta-da! Beautiful, perfect. I put a lot of butter on the top layers so that they would really puff up. And now I'm going to just take what butter I have left, and I'm going to use my brush to sort of push down the edge. And go all the way around. Okay, and then I'm just going to brush and brush to kind of saturate the top. Just love this. Love this. If you were to bake this and then just take it out of the oven, and tried to cut it, it would just fly all over the place. When we take this out, you'll see it's just a lot of layers. And so the Greeks have devised a clever way to prep it for serving before you even cook it. So I'm going to just take a knife, and what my mom always did was cut it into squares. It's also very traditional to cut it into diamond shape, and also cut it into triangles, but I'm going to just cut it into squares like I learned how to do. And for me, the easiest way is to make sure your knife is super sharp. Start in the middle and estimate about halfway, right? So start in the middle and start just cutting down to the bottom of the pan. Now you don't have to cut all the way through. I mean, you do want to cut all the way through that bottom layer, but it doesn't have to be like, I'm cutting all the way through with all my might. Just enough to make sure that when you try to separate them later, it won't take too much effort. Got So I've got relatively even halves here. Now, if you're making appetizers, you could cut it into each of these halves into thirds, and then we'll start cutting sideways. I'm going to assume that this is more of a side dish or even an entree, so I'm just going to cut them in half. And by the way, it feels really great to do that. I should have started in the middle like I did on the other side. It does make it a bit easier. One of the reasons that we start in the middle is because at the very ends, it lifts up. So, all right, now we've got 4. So now we're going to cut it in half again. And so again, I'm going to start here in the middle and hold it just steady. And then I've got one more. All right, now I think we have plenty here. Let's see. I think if we want them to be perfectly square, we can do 3. If you want them to be a little smaller, we can do 4. So I'm going to go ahead and do 3. And I'm estimating here. When you serve them, you really don't have to worry too much if they're not completely perfectly the same. But it does look nice if they're close. So we do the same thing on this side. And I would say that 1 or 2 of these would make a nice entree for a vegetarian friend. And 1 of these make an excellent side dish. Unless you're my husband, and then you'll be eating 3 or 4 no matter what. And so will my sons. So that's great. Now, one thing I like to do is to take a little bit of whatever butter there is and just kind of brush it on the open cuts, just to give that place a little more definition. Because as it puffs up, it's going to be, it'll form these little perfect squares, and somehow the butter helps it do that. It's great. It's like magic. All right, that's it. Now I'm going to put it in the oven, and we're going to cook this at 375 for, I would say, about an hour. We want it to be nice and golden brown. So here I go. We checked it at 45 minutes because it's always a good idea to check 15 minutes before you think it needs to be done. And at that point, I really could tell it needed another 15 minutes. So it's been an hour, and here we go. These are beautiful slices. So we have to let it cool off a little bit before we cut into it. So I'm going to just tell you what's good about this. You can tell that the layers are very flaky. It's browned into the slices. It's very brown on top. And when I first looked at it, it was brown, but the sides were very blonde. And so my mother would always say, Lucy, always 5 more minutes. So it was 5 more minutes and then another 5 more minutes with my mom. And so I knew it would be more than 5 minutes just by looking at it. So don't worry about taking it out too soon. Make sure it's really done, and then let it cool. It's going to settle, and we're going to taste it in just a couple minutes. So before I serve the Spanakopita, I made a little choriatiki salata. That means country peasant salad. And it's made of tomatoes, cucumbers, onions. I've got a pepper, and we're going to garnish it with some Kalamata olives. It has oregano on it, and then I'm going to add some feta cheese. So we're going to just enjoy this beautiful little salad on the side of our Spanakopita. Okay. Add some of the cheese, some of the olives, another. And I think I'm going to just make it a little prettier. Turn those all up. And I think I'll lay my pepper across the top. Maybe do it more like that. Okay, so that looks really nice, and it's going to be a beautiful contrast, not only in color but also in flavor. And we will enjoy our salad with the Spanakopita, and we'll have a complete meal. So you probably remember that we cut all the way through. You can see that. And so now we just have to go back and cut again. And this time we're cutting through the filling as well as the bottom of the pan. Well, we're not cutting through the bottom of the pan. We're cutting to the bottom of the pan. And it really is amazing how lovely these slices are coming out. And as I mentioned, if this hadn't been pre-cut, you'd have a lot of phyllo flying around right now. Instead, this is going to actually look rather professional. So once you do this, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to serve this to my fanciest friends. And they will thank you for it. All right. So now, let's see. The pan's not so hot. I'm going to just go ahead and serve myself a piece. In fact, I'm going to take two and separate them a little bit. And voila. Aren't they beautiful? And I just think that's going to taste great, and I can't wait to taste it. So do you mind? I'm going to have a taste right now. You can see the filling isn't too high. It's very crispy. And very flaky. Now, if you can pick this up with your hands, by the way. It's not considered déclassé. I think I'll put my knife there. Let's try that. Oh my. It smells like home. Wow. That is delicious. Wow, I should make this every week. It is so good. I think you're going to love having this in your repertoire. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And please join us next week for more delicious cooking from my kitchen to yours.